Welcome, everybody. Woo!
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
To the Climate Advocate Training Workshop. And let's see, there we go. Wasn't that patriotic music beautiful?
Absolutely. You know, there's a flying circus element to it, but it's a Sousa original.
Well, I want to introduce myself first, and then Brett will introduce himself. I'm Elli Sparks, Director of Field Development for Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm the one who picked the patriotic music being our little theme because I remember when I was a little girl riding to my grandmother's house in the back of my parents' Volkswagen, and my mother would have us all singing. This was before cell phones for the young people. You have to entertain yourself in the car. And my mother would sing beautiful folk tunes about maidens by creeks and Clementine and just wonderful Americana kind of folk music. And then we would sing holiday songs. My dad would play Good King Wenceslas, and the rest of us would be the page, and we would march in his footsteps. And then we would sing patriotic songs. So, Oh Beautiful, For Spacious Skies, and we would sing those pretty much as part of the routine of what we sang in the car. And when I was facing climate change over a decade ago and wondering what role I would be playing in addressing this issue as my children were in elementary school, and I looked at my little girl as she was describing what she was going to be when she grew up, and I thought, honey, you are going to be fighting for food in the mean streets of climate change. And it broke my heart. I was so surprised to discover Citizens Climate Lobby and realize that the solution was going to include my patriotism and my love for this country, that we fully fulfill the wonderful opportunity in this democracy, and that not only would I be fighting for the climate, but I would also be fighting to restore democracy and reclaim a larger piece of democracy for us. And so that's why I picked those patriotic tunes and why I'm with CCL right now. And Brett, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. So again, if you're just coming in, a reminder, please sit up close. We invite you to step outside of that comfort zone. We want you to rub shoulders with people. This workshop together for the next 2 hours and 15 minutes is going to transform all of us, but we need you to be by a packet. So if you aren't sitting at a seat that actually has a packet either on the chair when you got there or underneath, move on forward. We'll explain what the numbers are at the end of this first half. And again, we aren't going to take breaks, so feel free if you do need a stretch break, if you need to stand for a little bit, use the restroom, get some more coffee, you are empowered to do that at your own will. But let's jump right in here. Thank you very much, Elli. My name is Brett Cease. My role is Volunteer Education Coordinator and Director or Coordinator of Engagement as well for CCL. My role is to make sure that you are supported in your discovery process in all ahead with Citizens Climate Lobby. My background is within different disciplines of education, and I first started volunteering with Citizens Climate Lobby back in 2011 when, I'm guessing similar to many of you in this room, looking out, I recognize a lot of you, you were looking for an organization to feel like you had a contribution to give purpose to. And for me, I found Citizens Climate Lobby's focus, dogged determination, and commitment to relationship building the right fit for me. So I've been around ever since. And as a former educator, I couldn't get away without starting our workshop today with some learning objectives. So if we've done our job well, here's what you'll be walking away with. 1, we're going to ground you in our core values, understanding how they guide all of our work as Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers, as well as explore our 5 levers of building political will and how we influence change using each of them. 2, we're going to walk through how you can get active and involved back home in your own community and in your own chapter. We're going to highlight how you can communicate a lot of what we're talking about this morning so that you feel empowered to also go out and influence change. And we're going to set you up to feel confident for your meetings on the Hill on Tuesday. 3, we're going to provide an overview and help you understand the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, its history, why Citizens Climate Lobby supports it, and some of its key details. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Elli.
Thank you. All right. Yay.
Yeah, well, very lively. Thank you.
All right, so here's our agenda today. We're going to do a little overview of Citizens Climate Lobby. We're going to dig into our values. You heard Mark list them. We are going to experience them. We are going to cover the 5 levers of political will building. These are activities that we know generate the sense of political will for a member of Congress. We're going to dig into the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. You will have time to prepare for a mock meeting with a member of Congress, and then we'll have more experienced CCL volunteers come in, and they will do a couple of things. One, they will answer your questions in a small group, and then they will play the role of your member of Congress, and then we will wrap it up. So that's our agenda today. And let's dig into CCL. So we're going to first start off with the idea that CCL is you. And so you're going to take a moment and turn to the person next to you. If you're sitting next to your spouse or friend or something, I would invite you to shuffle up a little bit so you can meet somebody else. And introduce yourself with 2 things. You can let them know what your name is, where you're from, and what you're most committed to and why. So we're going to give you each a minute to share, and then you'll hear the patriotic music come on after 2 minutes to bring you back together.
Break.
All right, everybody.
Let's bring the attention back up front. Thank you, everyone, for sharing, and we'll direct our attention back up front.
All right. That was totally fun. Now you know one more person. That's awesome. So it was fun to hear your story. You got to meet a tiny bit Marshall this morning. And what I want to do is tell you just a little bit more about Marshall's story. So Marshall is a businessman who, like all of us, has something in particular that inspires his action on climate. So for the past 30 years, Marshall has dedicated himself to the effort of eradicating poverty. He has devoted his time, his talent, his treasures to specific programs designed to help poor people launch small businesses. And about probably now 14 years ago, when Marshall learned about climate change, he recognized that global warming was already threatening poor people and undermining the work that he and so many others had put into helping people rise from poverty. So Marshall decided that if he was serious about solving poverty, he needed to become serious about climate solutions as well. So he started Citizens Climate Lobby 12 years ago with 3 groups in San Diego. And today we have 459 groups, and that's just in the US. You can add almost another 100 for the groups that are around the world. And he started Citizens Climate Lobby because he had been involved with another organization that had a particular approach to organizing citizens to empower Congress to take action. And that group's name is Results. You heard that name a little bit this morning. And Marshall took that methodology and applied it to climate solutions. And we are building on that methodology and fleshing it out even more. So that's the methodology we'll be covering this morning with you, and you'll get to learn a lot more about that. Brett.
Yeah, so big news here, but just first off, too, quick show of hands, how many people are getting ready to meet with and lobby their member of Congress for the first time that they've ever done in Life on Tuesday? Raise them high, raise them proud. Excellent. Thank you for being here and stepping forward, because you are arriving at a critical key window into our congressional history. So an overview of the Energy Innovation Act. Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers for the past decade or so have been advocating for a carbon fee and dividend style bill. And in November of 2018, both the House and the Senate, with both Republicans and Democrats in both bodies, introduced the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It was historic for many reasons, and one of those reasons, it was the first time that bicameral, bipartisan carbon pricing legislation has ever happened in this Congress. So a huge round of applause on that. Yes. In January, the House reintroduced H.R. 763, that's House Resolution 763, as this congressional session's Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And at this point, Citizens Climate Lobby is focusing on this specific piece of legislation. I'm guessing you already knew that, but let's take a little moment to go under the hood and see some of the details about this legislation. So, at this point, Citizens Climate Lobby is supporting the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act because it's effective, it's bipartisan, it's good for people and our economy, and it works. And one of the things that we're training all of ourselves to do is lead in describing the policy's benefits. So what I'd like to do is highlight a way that you can say each of these benefits and put them in your own words. You're also welcome to follow along. There's a handout on these benefits in your sheet. You can internalize them in your own way. But let's start with number one. It's effective. This policy puts America on track to reduce our carbon emissions by 90% by mid-century. 90%. That is leaps and bounds ahead of the effectiveness of any current greenhouse gas regulation alone. All right? It's supported by both leading scientists like Dr. James Hansen and thousands of economists because it's simple and comprehensive and it works. Effective. Good for people. We've already heard this morning about the impacts of air pollution. Tens of thousands of Americans die every year because of poor air quality. Tens of thousands, and thousands more are sickened. This policy is good for people because it will improve health and save lives by reducing that air pollution that we are all breathing right now. It's also good for people because it puts that carbon dividend back where we need to invest it the most, in American households, allowing each of us to decide where we spend and see that money fit, especially benefiting low and middle income Americans. Good for people. Good for the economy. We are thrilled that the Energy Innovation Act is estimated to grow 2.1 million additional new jobs in the next 10 years alone, investing in our own communities, benefiting Main Street economies, hospitals, manufacturing, thanks to the growth of that dividend being spent back into our own communities. Good for the economy. It's revenue neutral. The government does not grow. That money is returned back to American households. And it's bipartisan. Number 5. It's bipartisan because a growing number of Republicans and Democrats are already highlighting that they see the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act as a way to build a bridge with climate change as an issue and not a wedge. And it also provides the opportunity for Republicans or Democrats interested in taking action on climate to follow the leadership of their own party who have already signed on in support of this monumental act. It's effective, good for people, good for the economy, revenue neutral, and bipartisan. At this point, what I encourage everyone to do, because I know looking out around the room, there's probably a lot of questions, right? What we're going to do is have you start writing down any of those zingers that you've got or the areas that you're really concerned about knowing how to address if it comes up with your meetings on your notes. And the second half, we'll have mentors come on in, and each small group will have a chance to ask them those questions. So please, for now, start writing down anything that you want to make sure to specifically address, and we'll save time in the second half for that. I'll pass it back to you, Ellie.
Thank you. All right. Ooh, goody. Okay, so the 5 levers of political will. We're going to touch on those. We've got 5 areas that we've discovered are effective in building political will and building a sense of interest in the community for the member of Congress to lead on, in our case, climate solutions. So first of all, the first lever is lobbying. You are here this week activating the lobbying lever.
Woohoo!
Woo! And you might go home and be part of the lobby team who continues to activate that lever. We are building relationships. You will probably discover in your meetings on Tuesday that this is not the one and only time your crew is meeting with your member of Congress. It is one of several times folks in your area, in your CCL chapter, are meeting with your member of Congress or his or her staff members, because we are about relationship building. Our media lever. Now, the rest of the levers, you'll see how they support the lobbying lever. So the media lever, we have volunteers who are back in the district doing a couple of things. Writing letters to the editor. Has anyone written a letter to the editor yet? Oh, goody. Awesome. So you've been activating the media lever. Some people graduate from writing letters to the editor to writing op-eds, a slightly longer piece that you have to ask the newspaper if they are interested in receiving an op-ed submission. And we have volunteers who will, just like the lobby team do, form a core of people who will meet regularly with the newspaper editorial page to ask for their endorsement of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And think how delicious that is for a newspaper who may have endorsed the member of Congress who's in office to say, well, we endorse this piece of legislation. So that's a wonderful extra bonus to have. And some of you may be delivering those kinds of endorsements on Tuesday when you meet with your member of Congress. So that's the media lever. Grassroots outreach. So you heard, and maybe even yourself have written a constituent letter to your member of Congress. We're collecting those in the room up the stairs. And on Tuesday, you will be hand delivering a stack of those handwritten letters to your member of Congress. So our outreach grassroots volunteers will do tabling events, might host a party at their house to tell their friends about it, get the friends to write the letters. We'll be doing presentations at the Rotary Club, at the Kiwanis Club, at the Garden Club, at church or synagogue or mosque. So this is outreach to everyday people, our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers. This is grassroots outreach. Then grass tops. This is a very important lever, members of Congress tell us. If we can get local respected leaders or statewide leaders or even national or international leaders who endorse the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and want the member of Congress to lead on climate solutions, those endorsements go a long way. And it might be a written endorsement, or it might be a verbal, you're bringing along the leader to the meeting with the member of Congress, and they can express their endorsement there. And then there is chapter development, and that is all of us caring about our chapter, chipping in, bringing food to the meetings, offering to help call people to remind them of the meetings. It is perhaps your group leader, not perhaps, but definitely your group leader or co-leaders. It might be a leadership team. If you have a sense that your chapter could use a little help with this, certainly volunteer, because this is sort of the underlying, this is the lever that lifts all the others if we can be developing ourselves and developing our chapters. And here is some successes. People often ask us about, oh no, this is you, I thought.
Yeah, I think you're doing the first two and I'll do the last.
Okay. Well, so first is the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. So how do we know we're effective when we got the bill, which is great because for 9 years I've been lobbying on an idea, the carbon fee and dividend. So this is a huge success, but what are some other smaller successes? The Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus is one, and it was invented by one of our volunteers, Jay Butera, who thought, it'd be really neat if we could get Florida to have a bipartisan climate solutions caucus. There's no big fossil fuel industries in Florida. It's pretty bipartisan. As a congressional delegation, it's front line with climate change. And when he talked to a Republican and a Democrat in the House from Florida, they said, the heck with Florida, let's make it a national caucus. And so they started the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus in 2016, and it grew to 90 members. That's 45 Republicans, 45 Democrats, more Republicans than is in the Freedom Caucus, which is pretty cool, yes. Then we just love what's happened in Canada. It's still, woohoo, where's Canada? Yay!
Any Canadians out there?
Out for Canada. So nearly as long as we've had CCL in the US, we've had CCL in Canada as well, thanks to Kathy Orlando and her crew up there. And not all of the Canadian provinces had some kind of climate legislation. So last fall, the Prime Minister of Canada said, if you are a province without a climate policy, you're going to be stuck with a carbon fee and dividend style policy. So we were thrilled with that. There's some battling going on in Canada, but I'm sure y'all will sort that out. But so exciting for Canada.
Excellent. And the last element is also highlighting all of the statements of support that we've already garnered. So at this point, we already have almost 1,000 prominent individuals, faith groups, local businesses, 30+ cities that have specifically signed on in support of the Energy Innovation Act, joining over 100 that had already endorsed the carbon fee and dividend policy CCL has been advocating for. Big cities like Austin, Dallas, Philadelphia, Chicago, right? Big statements, and you can see some of the prominent faces here on this page as well. So we've done a wonderful job, and all of your efforts to engage and reach out to your community are going to help continue this momentum forward. And what I'd also encourage you to do really quick, Elli is going to have the chance to jump into the next section, but just go to your packets, and there is a volunteer opportunities survey. And now that we've explored and reviewed the levers of political will, think about what it is for you that you're most interested in jumping into, and feel free to indicate those check boxes and be prepared to share that with your group leader the next time you see that.
Awesome. All right. So now we're going to dig into our values a little bit in an experiential way. And here's the list that Mark went over: focus, integrity, optimism, diversity, personal power, relationships, being nonpartisan. And we're going to start with an exercise that I want to frame up for you with a quote by an author, E.B. White. Who knows what books E.B. White has written? You can shout those out. Charlotte's Web. What else? Stuart Little. And did someone say The Shrunken White? Yes!
All right, some English majors out there.
What's that? Yeah, I'd love to have the English majors. So there was an article in 1969 interviewing E.B. White, and he said this beautiful thing about enjoying the world and also wanting to save the world. If the world were merely seductive, that would be easy. If it were merely challenging, that would be no problem. But I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve or save the world and a desire to enjoy or savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. And sometimes you might hear people add, although this is not from him, but in a way, savoring must come first, because if we aren't savoring the world, what possible reason do we have for saving it? So we're gonna do a savoring exercise, again with your partner. So hang tight, I'm gonna explain it and then give you an example. I want you to remember a specific place, perhaps, that you really enjoy, that is meaningful to you, that fills your senses when you're there, and that is just special for you, that you cherish. You're going to take turns sharing about that. I want you to be very specific in how you describe it. So you're not going to say, I love the beach. You're going to be very specific about the beach, the sand in your toes, what time of year it is that you love the beach, what's happening, what are you smelling, what are you seeing, what are you hearing. And I'm going to share mine. And this is a picture of my farm in Virginia. These are my British white cattle, and this is the woods. And I do the rotational grazing where I move them daily from one section of the field to another with a little single strand electric wires. And if you can imagine me going out there in my pants, because we got chiggers and ticks, and my boots, and it's calm and quiet. I'm walking out there. I'm not driving. There's no tractors. There's no truck driving around my property. I go to wherever the cows are, and I set up the next section of fencing. It's just a little single strand. I walk along and unroll it and put these little posts in, and then the cattle kind of collect where they know they're going to be moving in, and I unroll it where they're going to move in this one little section, and they walk past me and they nod their heads at me, and I have some bulls in there. You can't see it in this picture, but I thank the bulls. Thank you for keeping the ladies safe overnight and the little ones, and they nod at me, and they're very grateful to be moving into the next section of the paddock, and I absolutely love that. And when I'm out there with those cows and on my field, I think, why in the world would anyone want to do anything else? And so now I want you to go ahead and turn to your partner. We'll cue up the music again after 2 minutes and share with your partner something you savor very specifically. It was fun, wasn't that? All right, so let's do just a little sort of raise of hands. So how many people, I invited you to describe a place, but every once in a while someone says it's something else that inspires them, like family or a meal or something like that. So how many people shared about a specific place? Good. And did anyone share about sort of something other than a place? All right, cool. Yeah, that's all right. And let's see. So how many people shared about something close to where they live? All right. And then how many people shared about something that they have to travel to, some kind of far away? Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. So that was just lovely. I wish we could hear everybody's shares. So one of the things that I want to invite you to do is to consider that everyone has something that they love about life on earth. And sometimes that is an important thing to remember when we're meeting with someone perhaps of a different political party, that although they are not of the same political party that we are, they still have something that they love about living on earth. There is a beautiful sermon that Marshall Saunders, our founder, heard, and he went to the minister afterwards and asked if he could have a copy of that sermon, and it was something in the sermon that included something about Rusty Schweikert, which I'm going to read. So I gave it all already away. I was going to ask you, who knows who Rusty Schweikert is? Usually the older people know, but the younger people don't. All right, young people, he was an astronaut. So back when we were going to the moon, back in the old days. And here is this little beautiful excerpt from the sermon. During his Apollo mission in 1969, astronaut Rusty Schweikert was let out of the capsule on an umbilical cord. Usually, NASA keeps the astronauts compulsively busy up there, but a peculiar thing happened to Schweikert. Just as he emerged from the capsule, something went wrong within the capsule. Both mission control in Houston and the remaining astronauts had to concentrate on the problem. This left Rusty all alone, floating around Mother Earth in complete cosmic silence. During this time, Rusty had two profound conversion experiences. He looked back on Mother Earth, quote, a shining gem against a totally black backdrop, and realized everything he cherished was on that gem. His family and land, music and human history with its folly and its grandeur. He was so overcome that he wanted to, quote, hug and kiss that gem like a mother does her firstborn child. Compassion flowed through him. Trained as a jet fighter pilot, he was a typical macho man. But a breakthrough of something bigger came washing over him that moment in space. Rusty's second awakening in space was a political one. He was a red, white, and blue American who believed what he had always been taught, that the world was divided between the communist world and the free world. Yet, while floating around Mother Earth, he saw that rivers flowed indiscriminately between Russia and Europe, that ocean currents served communist, socialist, and capitalist nations alike, that clouds did not stop at borders to test for political ideology, and that there are no nations. Nations exist in the mind of the human race alone. On returning to NASA, Schweikert was not debriefed by any spiritual director about his mystical experiences. He confesses to having wandered about in a state of stupor for 6 months, bumping into walls while asking himself repeatedly this one question: why did God do this to me? Finally, he concluded God did this through him so that others might hear the message. What message? Compassion, interdependence, shared beauty on this shining, glistening planet. And I love this quote, yes. You know, when I attended my first CCL conference, and there were 75 of us at the conference, and after my first day of lobbying, I felt like I was bumbling around, bumping into walls in a state of stupor. And I had been to the climate advocate training workshop. In fact, I'd hosted it at my house to start our chapter in Richmond. And I remembered hearing this story, and I thought, that's what's happening to me in the halls of Congress. So I wasn't floating around the earth, but I was experiencing that same sort of mystical transformation in the halls of Congress, doing something that I hadn't done before and feeling connected in a way that I hadn't previously felt. Now, I want to invite you to think a little bit about what we're doing here in this workshop. So first you introduced yourself to someone, you described what you were passionate about, then you described something you absolutely love that is probably threatened by climate change. I know agriculture is threatened by climate change. You are beginning here to craft your story. So you will find people, still a little bit today, who want to argue with you about climate science. You can't change them necessarily, but no one can argue with you about your story. So it's a wonderful place to start, your own story. Why are you doing this work? Why are you in here in DC? Why have you taken time off of work or school to be here? Why did you pay your way here? Why are you staying in this fancy hotel or somewhere else? Why are you investing your time, your talent, your treasures? There's a particular reason, and no one can argue with you about that. So that's your story. You will find later as we describe the organization, the agenda for a meeting with a member of Congress. If it's a first time meeting with a member of Congress, someone will share their personal story. 50 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the most, share why they are there. Everyone will have a chance to introduce their names and where they're from, but there will be one person who says a little bit more about why they are there meeting with the member of Congress or their staff. Now, the other thing about stories, like you heard Mark say a little bit, we also are good at listening. And so 50% of the time we're telling our stories, and 50% of the time we're pulling out someone else's stories. And this is very important, I think, as well. So our experience in Richmond, I'll tell you a little bit of a tale there. We had been meeting with the editorial page editors of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and I was very interested in who they were as people, because if we're building these relationships, we have to get to know them as people. Well, it turned out the lead editorial writer, he likes to travel, he likes to write about his faith. He doesn't press it on people, but it really is meaningful to him. He goes to South Africa, stays in monasteries, and volunteers in the local community. So we knew he was headed to South Africa to stay in a monastery, to volunteer. And we were meeting with him that Friday. He was flying out that next Saturday. So our volunteers meeting with him, knowing this, found some information about climate change impacts on South Africa and climate heroes in South Africa. They printed those 2 articles, and they printed a 3rd article, something about Virginia. So they met with the editorial page editor, they told what we were working on again, updated him, asked for his support, laid out the 3 articles, and as he was leaving, he grabbed 2 of them, both of those about South Africa. And I imagine he read those on the airplane. So learning what other people's stories are as well, and helping them build their sense of becoming a climate hero. That's what we're doing for Congress and pretty much anybody else we interact with. At a tabling event, when we're seeking endorsements, anywhere we are connecting with someone around climate solutions. And this is a last little quote I want to share with you. Being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. So on one hand, you're here because your parents loved you, or your spouse loves you, or your kids love you. You are courageous. You are going to Capitol Hill on Tuesday because you love someone deeply, or something deeply, that beautiful place you described, or people in your family. Oh, you want to share about this, Brett?
Sure. Well, I'll just put this into context here. The other element of Elli's storytelling workshop right there is that you too have a chance to use this framework that Yale's program on climate communications has highlighted in how you can not only describe something in your life that you savor, but how it's changing and bring it back to climate. And then also grounding not only in that concern, but your actions or your solutions, which happen to be why you're here on Tuesday. So this simple 4-part framework is a really helpful way to ground not only sharing your savor story, but putting into action why you're here to fight for a livable world. And that grounds us specifically in what our next breakout section is going to be. And that is our mission. Let's explore our mission together. Because Citizens Climate Lobby has a two-part mission. I'm guessing that many of you here have already heard this first part before, right? To build the political will for a livable world. Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers believe that politicians themselves don't create political will, they respond to it. So it's our job to do so much political will building back home in district and throughout this greater country that they have no other choice but to respond to what we're asking them. But when we say the term political will, sometimes that can feel a little bit highbrow, or what do we actually mean? What does this look like? So let's just step back a bit, again, connecting what we've just talked about. Building political will is simply what our 550 plus chapters throughout this larger world are strategically doing to generate that awareness, to use those 5 levers and ratchet up that pressure to have a conversation back home in district, as well as throughout this larger country, on the importance of preserving a livable world and a sustainable climate. However, legislators don't just need to know, oh, okay, well, Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers, they want a strong economy or they want a sustainable climate. They need to know 2 things in order to actually take action. One of which is a specific actionable step. What can they actually sign on to, endorse, support that responds to the will of the people? 2, they also need to know that if they take that brave, bold action and become a climate champion, no matter who they are, that they won't be punished. That is the history of the last 20 years of our legislative climate movement. Legislators fearing punishment. And so it's our job as citizens to have their back and to use these levers to continually demonstrate that there is support back home in district, that their constituents expect action, and that they will support them when they take that action. All right? So why is this all important? Citizens Climate Lobby knows that all of you are giving a precious, invaluable resource. You are generously investing your time with us. And we, through our decade of organizing, have learned from others as well as ourselves about what generates effective political will and what doesn't. And why that's important is that we only want to ask you as volunteers to do the things that we know have the greatest chance of generating that political will. So let's step outside of our comfort zones today and this week. And I'm guessing if you're like me, just thinking back to where you might be before you got involved with Citizens Climate Lobby, or maybe you're here right now, I never imagined that I would be meeting face-to-face with my senator or having the chance to have an influential conversation with an editorial board director of my community newspaper. And what we're doing here is systematically stepping outside of our comfort zones and growing them, right? We're stepping outside a little bit, tentatively looking around. Is it still safe? Okay, great. Stepping a little bit more. And that is where the magic happens. To be able to really boldly go forth where no person has gone before, or perhaps where you've gone before, and really just encourage yourself to take that next step, because if you aren't, who will, right? And that's why you're here. So I would invite all of you, as you continue to think through your own involvement with Citizens Climate Lobby here at the conference, but also when you return home, where you can push that comfort zone. And so let's also ground ourselves in the second part of our mission, and this is actually where the second breakout activity is going to come from. Many people might not be aware that Citizens Climate Lobby's mission is also to empower individuals to experience personal and political breakthroughs. All right? To empower individuals to experience personal and political breakthroughs. How many people here are part of, another environmental nonprofit or active within the climate movement in other places? Great. How many people are part of a civic group back home, like Rotary or the Lions or another community initiative like that? How many people are parents or grandparents of children that are in school and maybe are part of a PTA, you name it. Well, all of you are already volunteering or active, I'm guessing, throughout your lives in other areas and ways that you're a community leader. And one thing that we want to ground ourselves in is think about those powerful moments and how they've transformed us and helped lead to these breakthroughs. Citizens Climate Lobby is all about those breakthroughs. And one key element of this workshop, I don't think Marshall would think that we've done a proper climate advocate training unless we included a story about one of his heroes, and perhaps some of yours as well, that of Mahatma Gandhi. I'm guessing many of you are familiar with the story of Gandhi's efforts to end British colonial rule of India. But let's actually step back and get to know an earlier Gandhi, a Gandhi that cut his teeth, actually, fighting for the civil rights of Indians in South Africa. And so the story goes, Gandhi is a young practicing lawyer in South Africa and continually butts into the injustices that are being done to Indians throughout that country. And he works up the courage to essentially set up a meeting with the head of the government at that time, the man on the right here, a towering figure by the name of General Jan Smuts. And Gandhi will walk into that meeting and he'll look up at the general and say one sentence, quietly, "I've come to tell you that I'm here to fight against your government." Pretty bold, right? To which the general, somewhat sneeringly, looks down and says, reportedly, "Oh, really? And do you have anything else to tell me?" To which Gandhi, without missing a beat, replies, "Why, yes, I intend to prevail." Somewhat astonished, the towering general asks him, "And how do you intend to do that?" Gandhi says 3 words, "With your help." With your help. This is not apocryphal. This is what the general, Jan Smuts, actually wrote in his own diary later on. He highlighted Gandhi's dogged determination. He highlighted Gandhi's relentless ability to keep showing up, not taking no for an answer, and to push through without retaliation to do the right thing. And in 1914, after earning the general's trust and friendship, Gandhi was part of a larger movement that repealed the most abusive and oppressive civil rights laws in South Africa and eventually led to those civil rights being extended. And this, my friends, is at the very heart of what is at CCL's methodology. Building these relationships. 5 years ago, if you can think back to 2014, people told us there was no way that you could get Republicans to actually introduce and co-sponsor a bill that said that climate change is real, significantly influenced by humans, and that Congress should do something specifically about it. Our CCL volunteers, some of your own compatriots in your own chapter, chose to see that as a possibility instead, built those relationships, and with Representative Chris Gibson, introduced the Republican Climate Resolution. Even 3 years ago, people said there was no way you could get both parties to sit down together and actually have a dialogue about climate change, much less form a caucus with the word climate in its title. Again, our CCL volunteers chose to see that as a possibility and worked with Representatives Deutsch and former Representative Corbello, as Elli's highlighted, to form the Climate Solutions Caucus. And at the end of last year, had brought 90 members, 45 from each party together, to actually have these courageous conversations about the most pressing issue of our time. Even last year, around this time, perhaps even a little bit later, people said there was no way that you could actually get real-life Republicans and Democrats in Congress to co-sponsor and introduce carbon pricing legislation in Congress. It hadn't happened in almost a decade. And again, CCL volunteers like you and I chose to see that as a possibility, built those relationships, and the Energy Innovation Act is a direct result of our networks and all of our volunteers' efforts. So as a reminder, relationships matter. They move things forward in profound ways, often that we do not even initially realize or can perceive as happening. And Citizens Climate Lobby, I think, for me, What sets this organization apart is that we are committed to building ongoing positive relationships with our members of Congress, no matter who they might be, and our members in our community to move them forward into building that space that we need them to act on this issue. So with that, let's talk about an activity that we can jump into. And I think one final distinction that really helps ground what we're talking about here is setting up an example between what we mean by empowerment compared to what we mean by somebody being forced into something, power versus force. And so let me read a quote by a famous legal scholar by the name of Charles Reich, who was actively involved in policymaking for decades and saw a lot of the behind-the-scenes negotiations that happened and what was effective and what wasn't. And here is what he writes about power versus force. When you reach out to another person through the energy or creativity within you, and that other person responds, you are exercising power. And when you make somebody else do something against their will, to me, that is not power at all. That is force. And force, to me, is a negation of power. Power versus force. Grounding yourself in where you've seen examples of both of these in your own lives. I think this quote provides a helpful window into why Citizens Climate Lobby communicates from a different frame. So let's talk to each other here. This next breakout is going to be asking you to reflect on your own experiences of personal empowerment. Think about a time, whether it was a role model, a parent, a boss, a partner, somebody that invited you to step into that space, one of the organizations that you're a part of, to expand that comfort zone and have a breakthrough in exercising your own transformative power in influencing the world. Take a moment, and we'll have a chance for each of your partners to share with each other, and then we'll return back for the next section of the workshop. All right, go for it. We'll have the opportunity to do a lot more small group discussion in just a moment. We're almost transitioned to the second part of our workshop. And I'll just ground the final sharing of this by saying that by speaking with each other, by being in community that is active on this issue, and reminding ourselves that real and profound personal change is possible, each of us is further emboldened to take those next steps. And I hope and I invite each of you to reflect on how you can do that in your own involvement with Citizens Climate Lobby. So thank you for sharing, and I'll pass it back to you, Elli.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so we're gonna dig a little bit more into the 5 levers of political will. And sometimes when I think about what exactly is this political will that we're building and what is it trying to do, I have an image of having like a dinner party at my house, and the guests have arrived and they've enjoyed themselves, and now it's time to go, and we open the door and it's pouring rain outside and nobody packed their umbrella. I'm the hostess, so it's my job to get them safely to the car so they're not wet. And so I'm gonna pop up my little umbrella and I'm gonna walk each one of them out to the car and get them into the car. Hold the umbrella, you know how you open the door and you hold it above someone so they can get in without getting wet. That's my job as hostess, and that's our job as political will builders back in our states and district. We are popping up the umbrella and we're walking our member of Congress to the car, and we're making sure that they are not getting wet when they do this work of stepping up and leading in solving the climate crisis. So that's political will, and a little picture for you. So here is another picture I want to cover with you. This is a visual of how these different efforts work together, these 5 levers, how you might organize your chapter. Now, some of you might be in a big chapter that's already organized with committees around the different levers. Some of you might be in a tiny chapter where the group leader is doing a lot of all of these different levers all by him or herself, and they're relieved to see, oh, finally someone who can help write letters to the editor. But whatever size group you are in, you can think about how these levers work together, the idea perhaps of forming different teams. Maybe there's 5 of you in your chapter. Each one of you could be in charge of a different lever, and as new volunteers come in, you could place them right away in one of the teams. So the lobby team, we're doing all of this work to give the lobby team the tools they need when they're meeting with the member of Congress to demonstrate that people back in the state and the district really want leadership on this issue. The media team is generating those letters to the editor. On Tuesday, you'll be delivering some letters to the editor, perhaps to your member of Congress, and op-eds and endorsements from the newspaper. The Grass Tops team is securing those endorsements from local, state, national, or international respected leaders, maybe bringing in written endorsements or actually bringing in the leader or bringing the member of Congress to visit the leader at his or her place of work. And then the grassroots team doing the tabling and the presenting, building awareness in the community, gathering up those letters. And then the group and volunteer development team sort of buoying everything, lifting everything up like a cloud. When you pull out the pink sheet, Brett referenced this before, this is kind of like a application for a job. I mean, you've already got the job, you're already a member of your CCL chapter, but you could sit down with your group leader and talk about what you might be interested in doing, and you'll notice that if you are perhaps good at writing, like I was when I started, I had written newsletter articles as a development director for lots of nonprofits. I was pretty good at writing, so I could write letters to the editor. I could write op-eds. I could write emails offering speakers for public speaking events. Or I also like to do public speaking, so I enjoyed tabling. Put me in front of the Rotary Club. I'm happy to talk. You know, you think about what your skill set is. Let your group leader know what your skill set is, because the sooner you let them know, the better they can put you to work more quickly and more efficiently. Let them know what your growing edge is, that stepping outside of your comfort zone. I really like writing. I'm terrified of public speaking, but I think it'd be really good for me to start doing that. And so let them know where you want to learn and grow, and know that on Citizens Climate Lobby Community, which Brett is in charge of, you can get all kinds of training. You might have done some of the videos there yourself before you came. So use this to have a discussion. On the back is also some ways to think about how you might involve yourself in your local chapter around these levers. Then we're going to take just 5 minutes for you to think about that and have a conversation with your partner about how you want to activate one of those 5 levers. So go ahead and turn to your partner, and we will cue you when it's done and take turns. All right, very good. So that was a lively discussion and a great starting point, and I invite you to continue that conversation with your group leader and hang on to your buddy and encourage each other in getting involved with each of your local chapters. And I want to cover, you may already have a little experience with this. Most CCL chapters host a monthly meeting. If you were here yesterday, you participated in the video conference part of it, perhaps. You got to see Mark and Dr. Sheeling Su, so we always have an expert who is going to help us learn more about climate advocacy or science or economics or policy, something to help us become better experts on communicating about climate solutions. And then Mark gives us a little rundown of accomplishments to keep us motivated and energized, celebrating. We also practice, in a little bit, Brett's going to practice with us laser talks, and so those are often part of a monthly meeting, either a laser talk or a listening exercise, aiming towards that 50-50 that Amy talked to us about in our meetings, half listening, half talking. And then we have our monthly action items. So we do those 4 things. We learn, we celebrate, we practice, we act. Usually those monthly meetings are about 2 hours long, so about 40 minutes for the video conference, a little time for food, and then some planning for local chapter work. Sometimes chapters have those on 2 different days. So just check in with your group leader and find out how that goes. And then there is one rule that we have in Citizens Climate Lobby. This is an important rule for those of us meeting with our members of Congress on Tuesday, and that is that we find something we can respect, admire, and appreciate about our member of Congress, and we share that with them in the meeting. And I love a little story. Oh, I don't have time. Maybe, okay.
You have time.
Quickly, I remember it was maybe the second or third conference I went to, and some of our volunteers from one of the tornado states came back from their meeting with a member of Congress. It was to be a face-to-face meeting. They had their message of appreciation all worked out, what they were going to thank the member of Congress for, and they showed up for the meeting, and the receptionist said, "I'm sorry, the member of Congress is not available. You will have to meet with the staff." And so they were a little disappointed. They filed into, it was a tiny office, and they had a round table, and they had to kind of shuffle around to get to the table. You'll see some of those House offices are really small. And the staffer came in, and it was filled with those little cubbies, you know, the little office walls that are just part of the way up. So people were back there on telephones and whatnot. And our CCL volunteers decided they would still start the meeting with a message of appreciation for the member of Congress. And they said, "We just want to please pass our gratitude on to your boss for the work he did in restoring the river that runs through our city." And from behind those little partitions, you heard a voice, "I was very proud of that work that I did." And out marched the member of Congress. He was afraid of these environmentalists who were going to come in with their Birkenstocks and hairy legs and read him the riot act. So, you know, to start with the message of appreciation does a couple of things. One, it just disarms the other person who thinks, "Oh, I'm going to be yelled at one more time for things I mean, think about having a job where half the people yelled at you all the time for what you were doing in your job. That would be intimidating, to say the least. And it also does something for us. When we can find something that we can respect, admire, and appreciate about the member of Congress, we can begin to envision them as the climate heroes we need them to become. So it's a two-part, one rule, and why we do it. So I'm going to turn it over to Brett to tell you about
I love it.
the act.
Thank you, Elli. Thank you very much. All right, so that's some pretty wicked social science there that you're employing. How many social scientists do we have in the room today? Any psychologists, you name it? All right, I like that, you know, we have some people proud of that identity, as you should be, because we can learn a lot from social science. And one new book I want to throw out there, if you haven't heard of it or if you haven't read it yet, it's called Peak: Secrets from New Science of Expertise. And it is done by Dr. Erickson, the man who now is better known for the 10,000-hour rule, even though that was somewhat misappropriated from his own research. But he looks at the importance of how successful individuals develop their craft. We all know practice makes perfect, right? But he goes beyond the earlier introduction of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule, which was again based on his earlier work, and really looks at how do individuals that have excelled with their job engage in deliberate practice and lifetime feedback to really excel to a point far beyond their peers, all right? And again, this workshop, we're not going to probably quite get to that level of peak performance today, but we're going to start because practice is important. And one of those elements that we're going to invite you to participate with us today is something called Laser Talks. They're bite-sized advocacy resources that are really at the heart of what I think makes an effective CCL advocate. And again, they're not meant to be memorized. You don't have to say the exact same thing everyone else is saying and drink the Kool-Aid. You just have to be able to internalize what you think are the key points that are personal for you in your own conveyance of these topics. And what we'll focus on today is one that's specifically on the Energy Innovation Act, and we'll model that in just a moment. But we take time as an organization every month to do this, right? It matters to place time in investing in communication activities so that we're ready to go. When that opportunity shows up, we can step in and have that dialogue, talk to our member of Congress, write that effective letter to the editor, show up and have that conversation with even somebody in your own family or community. So, what this is going to look like, I invite all of you, you're welcome to start looking at this yellow sheet. This is, you know, what we're actually having as our primary ask. And you can use this as also the basis for your dialogue. I'm going to just happen to have a conversation with Elli here, and then we'll do a break and have a chance for each of you to practice this too. So, hey Elli, fancy meeting you here. Do you mind actually if I tell you about this new policy I just heard about, the Energy Innovation Act?
Yeah, sure, go right ahead.
Well, it's exciting to me. It's bipartisan. It's H.R. 763 in the House. It's introduced by both Republicans and Democrats, and it will effectively allow America's carbon emissions to be reduced, helping manage the threat of climate change and unleashing American technology, ingenuity, innovation, you name it. And I think what's most exciting for me is that real heroes like Dr. James Hansen, and also in the news recently, thousands of economists have signed on in support for policies like this. And if you have a moment, I'd love to share a little bit more and get a thought of what your reactions might be to it. Would that be all right?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to hear some more.
Great. And then you can jump more into the benefits or areas that you are interested in. So with that, what we'd like to do is just take a moment and feel free to start sharing the benefits and having a chance to respond to your partner and engage in this active learning activity. Each of you will have 1 minute right now, and then we'll remind you to switch, and you'll have a chance again to put this into practice with your members in a little bit too. But go for it. You can break out and have that conversation. All right. Who tried out something new there? Stepped outside of your comfort zone a little bit? Had fun describing the policy? Excellent. So we've reached a point. I want to highlight some specific elements of the policy. I'm guessing that some of you tried the effective message, again, framing how powerful this policy will be in reducing our emissions on track, 40% in the first 12 years, 90% by mid-century. How many people used the effective message in your framing? Excellent. How many people discussed benefits? Again, looking at the benefits are good for people for air pollution, or for that power of the dividend, investing back in families to see and spend as they see fit. Excellent. How many people had the chance to focus on the economic message, on the job growth and the investment in local communities? Excellent. How many people found the revenue neutrality discussion to be an important thing to leverage and highlight in your discussion? Excellent. And lastly, who brought in the message of bipartisanship and really focused on that as a way to convey in your laser talk? Excellent. Well, I will highlight that all of these data sources that you've seen with those benefits are available. We will highlight, if you haven't seen them, where to get our slides at the end as well. If you're curious about some of the specific numbers you're seeing in your handouts, you can also ask Ellie and I at the end. But what we'd like to do here before transitioning into getting ready for your members' meetings is just really review the 3 prongs, the details behind this policy, because we've talked about the benefits, but what does this actually do? So I like to think of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act as a 3-legged stool. Some other elements of 3s are welcome as well. You can create your own metaphor, but it does this. The first leg establishes a price on fossil fuel emissions. It starts at $15 per metric ton and goes up annually $10 each year. It's assessed as far upstream into our economy as you can imagine, and what that does is allow administrative simplicity, because a lot of these fuels are already being weighed or taxed, recorded. This might just add a simple line to reduce the amount of administrative simplicity that would be required to assess that fee. There's also a provision in H.R. 763 if that escalation of $10 a year isn't enough, after the first 5 years to escalate it an additional $5 each year that it isn't meeting the target. That second leg, 100% of the dividends, the net revenue is returned back to American households. It doesn't grow the government. It's given back to us in the form of a monthly rebate per capita equally. You, me, Bill Gates, we get the same amount. Adults, 1 share. Children, half shares. We've had one of the more prominent economists in the Department of the Treasury do an in-depth analysis. It's called the Dividend Delivery Study. It's available on Community in our website. If you would like to look at the detailed pathway and the analysis of the agencies involved, like the Department of Treasury or the IRS, the administrative costs imposed, the bill contains a provision after the first 5 years that the amount of administration that is required to actually get this dividend back to the American people can be no more than 2% of the amount collected, right? Show me any other program that is that efficient. The third leg of the stool is equally critical. It's the border carbon adjustment, and what this ensures is that it will protect American manufacturing by making sure that goods coming in without a similar price in their own country have that fee added when they enter our economy, so that we aren't incentivized to essentially buy foreign goods rather than domestic that are more cheap. And it will also make sure to not offshore our manufacturing by rebating that in any exports that we have. We are confident that our WTO compliance behind this law will hold up. We're assessing that same fee both domestically as well as internationally, so we're not favoring one side or other of that trade balance. And this incentivizes other countries to do the same thing, because they would not want that fee going to our coffers, instead to be collecting it for their own government's use. So those are the three stool legs that I like to think of: the fee, the dividend, and the border adjustment. It's important as well not only to highlight the benefits and the actual components of how it works, but let's briefly talk about the regulatory adjustment. So the regulatory adjustment you can think of as this: it doesn't double penalize. We want to provide businesses certainty and allow the act to be able to show that it can reduce emissions on its own without having that additional regulation. And should after 10 years that act's market mechanisms not work on their own, essentially what would happen is that regulation again can come through and make sure to also be complementary to those efforts. You can think of the EPA's core authority with the Clean Air Act architecture as untouched, because this bill makes sure, the Energy Innovation Act, makes sure that the EPA's authority to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant is remaining intact. It makes sure that other things that remain untouched include CAFE standards, so auto mileage vehicle standards. The EPA's ability to regulate any other air pollutant remains untouched. The EPA's ability to set renewable fuel standards, to enforce appliance efficiency standards, to make sure that even methane leakage, all of those untouched. It focused very narrowly on greenhouse gas emissions, would only largely affect two things: the Clean Power Plan, which has been held up in courts, isn't currently active, and new or expanded plants and factories. Additionally, you can also highlight the importance that this act estimates that it would cut an additional 1 billion greenhouse gas tons of emissions by 2030 compared to what the Clean Power Plan would have done in that same time. An additional 1 billion greenhouse gas emission tons. So it's effective. And the great thing is that the economic literature is replete with examples of this, showing that it will be an effective impact on its own. If it isn't, that provision in the Energy Innovation Act makes sure that not only do those regulations then become something that are permitted, it's expected that the EPA, after 10 years, should we not be on that target pathway, that very ambitious pathway to get us 90% decarbonized by mid-century, is required to step in and set the regulations to make sure that we get there beyond what we've already established with that price. And I think that's very key. The other two elements that are key to highlight: this also provides a minor provision for agricultural use fuel and military use fuel. The agricultural focuses in our economy are set by the Farm Bill. The Pentagon frames the military budget, so we want to make sure to honor both of those. Each of those emission sources are roughly around 1%, give or take, of our overall economy. So that's something that we want to be able to highlight with these exemptions and also honor with the appropriate pathway for where they're assessed. So all of that being said, again, I've provided a lot of content right now that I think would be helpful to unpack. And in just 10 minutes, we'll have a chance for you to interact with those members of Congress. And so I'm actually going to go back there. Elli is going to set you up for those meetings, but please write down questions that we've not been able to speak to yet that you want to have your member of Congress answer. And we'll make sure actually in 5 minutes to have those be a part of your preparation. I'll pass it back to you.
All right, so there's the website for the Energy Innovation Act.org. Nice place to go. You're going to write your questions down. And now we're going to talk about our meeting with our member of Congress. So there's two things I want to cover with you. One are the roles in your meeting, and the second thing is what the meeting agenda looks like with your member of Congress. So you can see there's quite a long list of roles. You might have that many people in your meeting. Likely you won't. You will have people covering more than one role. These are flexible. And we have a member, we talked about sending that message of appreciation to your member of Congress. So someone is going to give that message of appreciation. It is ideally a constituent, someone who lives in the state or district. You will have someone be the time monitor, like Amy described, keeping track of the time, making sure we end the meeting on time, confirming at the beginning of the meeting, how long is the meeting, how long do we have with you, Senator? 15 minutes. I'll let everyone know when we are about 3 minutes before the end of the time we have with the senator. And then also doing that silent monitoring of how much we're talking, how much we're listening, how much they're talking. Note taker. Often when you're new, you think, I'll be the note taker, because then I can just take notes and not have to worry about it. We like the note taker to be someone with a little experience, who knows, who's been around a lobby meeting a time or two, so they can read the situation. So I invite you to do something other than being a note taker if it's your first time. Everyone can be part of keeping the discussion going, asking those open-ended questions, the who, what, where, when, how questions, avoiding the best you can yes or no questions, and avoiding the why questions. Why won't you support this? But instead, what can we do to make it possible for you to support the act? Then you have the asker, someone making that primary ask. Will you join as a co-sponsor of the act? Will you help be a co-sponsor in the Senate to relaunch the act in the Senate? And then often there's a secondary ask. If the primary ask is declined, that we have some secondary asks. And you'll hear Danny discuss those throughout the rest of the conference. Someone who is delivering all of those constituent letters, the letters to the editor that somebody has printed, any endorsements that are written, someone delivering, those are the things we deliver, the message back from the community. We are not delivering books we've written about climate change or interesting articles about climate change. We're not delivering those kinds of things. We have someone who's dedicated to follow-up. Maybe in the meeting, they have expressed interest in seeing something, more details of something, and it's a young person who the staffer says, email me. You want someone who's going to follow up and send the email. And that follow-up person also does a thank you note. Often after a meeting on the Hill, you will gather in the hallway with the rest of your meeting team, and the follow-up person will have a thank you card, and everyone can sign it, and then they actually might go and hand deliver it right back to the office. It's so nice, the members of Congress, they love to have their pictures taken, even the staffers, so have someone take a picture, and then it is also nice to have someone observing. You could be maybe catching when someone, I know I can get amped up in a meeting, and I was in one meeting once, I thought, let's get into it with my member of Congress, and the CCL volunteer next to me just patted my hand gently, and I was like, oh, I feel so much better. So we can all help serve that role, but it might be that someone is designated to observe. So then here's our meeting outline. The beginning is where we sort of get a couple of things out of the way. Thank you for meeting with us. Thank you specifically for something you did that we respect. How much time do we have? Round of introductions. State our purpose. We're here to seek your support as a co-sponsor of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. Middle of the meeting, discussing, asking those open-ended questions. If they say something that confuses you, you can say, can you say a little bit more about that, please? Say, keeping the conversation going, listening to them, letting them talk as much as you possibly can during that time, finding out what are the roadblocks for you, what do we need to be doing back in the district to help you take action on this. And then the end of the meeting, where we come back to the primary ask and this is the one time we ask a yes or no question. Could you be a sponsor? Could you ask the member when you go back and talk to your boss if he or she would co-sponsor the bill? And if there's a no, what about one of these secondary asks? Could you say a yes to one of these secondary asks? Take your picture, plan the follow-up, thank them for their time. So what we're going to do, shortly here is you see on your seats, you should have a handout with a number on it on the top, and that's the number of your group. And we've organized it so there's 4 of you who will turn your chairs around and team up with the 4 behind you, so those numbers should roughly match. If you need to do a little bit of rearranging, like maybe you're sitting on the edge, you need to come in. If you're the only person with your number, go sit with another group. Get yourself organized. You're going to have about 40 minutes. We're going to have a volunteer with more experience, a mentor, come in and sit with your group. They're going to be doing 3 things with you. One, first of all, answer those questions. Brett asked you a couple times to write down any questions you had, particularly of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And so you'll have time to ask those questions of that experienced volunteer. Then, together, perhaps with the help of that volunteer if you like, you will plan your meeting. One person is to step up as the leader of the meeting and just get things going. Don't spend a lot of time sorting out who's going to be the leader of the meeting. Someone step up, is the leader. Who's going to be the note taker? You're the note taker. Who's going to set the appreciation? You do the appreciation. Just get those roles assigned, prepare yourselves, and then you'll have time to practice as if you're meeting with that volunteer who will pretend like they are your member of Congress. And then together you will debrief, sharing where you think it went well, where you'd like to change. You'll get some feedback from the experienced volunteer who can tell you what they thought about how the meeting went. So, Brett, bring in the members of Congress. And folks, turn your chairs around. At the end, I'm going to ask you to turn the chairs back around to make it easier to set up afterwards. So go ahead and get yourselves turned around. All right, so now it's time. The member of Congress has to go vote, but we don't want them to leave, actually. We want you to transition to debriefing about the meeting, sharing what worked, asking questions about how the meeting went with your member of Congress. So transition to that last section of sharing feedback with each other.
And first and foremost, just want to give a huge round of applause to our members and our mentors. Thank you so much for all of you making it in. This is absolutely the most critical part of the workshop. This is absolutely the most critical part of the workshop. And please, thank you again, every single one of your mentors. This is really critical for you giving time, and I really appreciate all of that opportunity. I know I'm speaking for all of us. As a quick show of hands, how many people tried something new for the first time during their meeting? How many people kind of got outside of their comfort zone and maybe stepped inside of something that made them feel afraid at first, and now are ready to go with using that same tactic on Tuesday? Awesome. How many people leaned on that team sport concept? Lobbying's a team sport, and your team held you up. Excellent. Who's ready to go on Tuesday? Excellent, excellent. So Ellie's going to close with a quick story, but what I'd like to do before that is just do a quick logistics slide, and that is this. So at this point, we've reached the end of the workshop. We will end with the story in a moment, but what we'd like you to do is just take a moment. Citizens Climate Lobby is a culture that thrives on continuous feedback and wants to improve this experience. So the bottom sheet out of your packet today is actually a workshop handout. And if you could just take a moment right now, and we'll take 2 minutes to reflect on what's worked for you, what continues to be areas of questions. At this point, you can leave those at the end of the workshop today on your chair, or our interns will be available at the back of the doors at 12:30 to collect those as you leave. But we do invite you to help us make this workshop even better next year by sharing your own experience. And your mentors are also welcome to share their business cards and stick around, or they also, I know, have places to go for lunch, so they're also welcome to stop off here. But let's just take 2 minutes to do the initial part of that reflection. We're not finished yet, but I'll highlight this. So Ellie and I's emails are here, as well as the workshop slides this morning. If you have anything that you'd like to make sure to return to, please feel free to write down where you can get this short link and visit any of these slides. You can download them on your own. All of the scripts and citations and studies that we've included are a part of the speaker notes. And just wanted to say that Elli and I are going to be sticking around here at the very front. If you have any questions that your group didn't get to or would like to have any other conversation, we'll be happy to have dialogue. And at this point, I'm actually going to pass it to you, Elli,
Awesome.
and we'll close with a powerful story.
Right, click on my slide. All right, so the story that we shared with you about Gandhi early on, there is more than one CCL volunteer who's been in a meeting with a member of Congress and remembered that story as a way to frame themselves within that meeting. Gandhi did, as you know, return to India. It was July 1914 when he left, and he had spent some time living and working on a cooperative farm where he learned how to make sandals. It wasn't something that he had known how to make before as a lawyer, as someone who had been educated in higher education. And he made a pair of sandals and gave them to General Smuts when he left South Africa. And General Smuts wore those sandals, as you can see from that quote, "I've worn these sandals for many a summer, even though I may feel that I am not worthy to stand in the shoes of so great a man. It was my fate to be the antagonist of a man for whom even then I had the highest respect." And when Gandhi turned 70, General Smuts traveled to India and gave those sandals back to Gandhi in gratitude for that experience of having that friendship, dare we say. So I invite you to think about that as you head out, strengthened with your CCL values and empowered with this experience of practicing meeting with your member of Congress and a particular way of looking at those meetings and those relationships. So thank you so much, everyone, and great job in the workshop.
You've officially made it through